Welcome to the Vermont Public General Election Debates. I'm Cyrus, one of the hosts of Vermont Edition. Today we're bringing you the first in a series of debates this month as part of our coverage of statewide and federal offices ahead of Vermont's November 8th general election. But you don't have to wait until that day to vote. Ballots have already gone out in the mail to all eligible Vermont voters. Today's debate is between the major party candidates for Vermont's only seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. Joining me live today in Vermont Public Studio in downtown Winooski is Democrat, Vermont Senate President Pro Tem Becca Balint, a longtime legislator from Brattleboro. Senator Balint, welcome.
Thank you, Connor.
Also in our studio today, Republican candidate Madden, a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, anti-war advocate, and self-described independent from Bellows Falls. Madden, welcome.
Good to be here, Connor.
So here's the format that we'll use today and for the rest of our 2022 general election debates. In our first segment, I'll ask common questions to both candidates. They'll each have 60 seconds to answer, then short follow-up questions and answers are possible. In the second segment, the candidates will have an opportunity to ask each other questions. That's 30 seconds to ask and 60 seconds to answer. Follow-ups are possible. Then we'll turn to a series of questions submitted by Vermonters. Candidates will have 30 seconds to answer. Next, we'll have a lightning round of questions with very brief answers, 10 seconds or less. We'll conclude today with a 1-minute closing statement from each of the candidates. So let's begin. We'll start with questions to both of you, so please limit your answers to 60 seconds. And a reminder, I may ask follow-up questions. Inflation is an issue that is on every Vermonter's mind, and it impacts all of us, from soaring costs of fuel to the cost of food, clothing, and other necessities. I'd like you to name one specific thing you would do in Congress to address inflation and who you would work with to make sure it actually happens. Senator Balint, we'll start with you.
Inflation is something that is affecting all Vermonters, including myself. I do the grocery shopping in my house. I've seen the prices rising week after week. And unfortunately, inflation is not an easy thing to address. But here's how I would approach it. So first and foremost, we need to look at price gouging that's happening. And I would support a bill like Elizabeth Warren's in the Senate on really going after companies that are using this opportunity to price gouge on goods and services that we all rely on. Would also look at a windfall profits tax on fossil fuel companies. And on a broader long-term sense, we really need to be investing more in making sure that we're building more products here in the United States. As I travel around Vermont and talk to a lot of folks in the service industry, in the retail and hospitality industry, they've told me that a challenge for them is prices have gone up so much and they don't have local suppliers that they can turn to. So making sure we attack price gouging, making sure we are building more things here at home.
Now, Senator Balint, you have pushed for an aggressive transition away from fossil fuels, but solutions like alternative heating methods, electric vehicles remain too costly for many Vermonters. How would you implement these long-term solutions without subjecting Vermonters to the short-term price hikes?
So this is something that we've been dealing with in the legislature for years, is looking at how do we support Vermonters as we transition to a climate economy. So we've invested millions of dollars in making sure that Vermonters can insulate their homes. We've been investing in weatherization programs. I was actually just at a graduation program for students in Barrie who have gone through a weatherization program. So we know part of it is making sure Vermonters have homes that are safe and comfortable and can navigate these really hard winters. We have to make sure that we support the investments in LIHEAP, making sure folks have access to affordable fuel this winter. And we need a big investment in helping Vermonters transition to both solar products and also heat pumps. This is not something that can be done on its own. We are part of a much larger world community and national community dealing with climate change. We can't bear the brunt of it alone. We need to be looking to the federal government to help regular Vermonters burden those costs.
Now, Madden, I want to ask you, how would you address inflation and who would you work with to make sure that it actually happened?
Well, thank you for the question, Connor. So inflation is a very complex issue, but the simple thing to do right off the bat is to acknowledge that the people who are most affected by it are people who have fixed incomes, people on minimum wage, and those people need to have their benefits adjusted to the price of inflation so that they're hit less hard. I would agree with Becca on taxing windfall profits. Inflation is about having too much currency in the economy, and in order to extract some of that, you need to extract it from the sources where it is most equitably extracted, and so those are the companies doing the best. Fossil fuel, pharmaceuticals come to mind. we need to acknowledge that the source of inflation is often not just that there's too much currency, but also that there's restriction in supply. And clearly this bout of inflation was kicked off through energy shortages, as well as other things, but primarily through energy. And so that leads into the question of how do you address I'm sorry, I'm out of time.
Okay, so, but I do want to ask, you've criticized political establishments for its failed policies on many issues. What initiatives would you propose to address inflation and rising costs that neither party has successfully done?
So as you asked, who would I work with? As an independent, I would work with whoever's concerned about this issue on either side. And I think that's an advantage to both, to Vermont and the United States as a whole. I think what I am not always doing is inventing some new third rail. I'm also saying, well, hey, Senator Warren's idea about a windfall profit tax is a good idea. So it's not necessarily bringing always new ideas to the foreground, but saying from each side, you have values that I agree with and ideas that are worth collaborating with you on.
So on this, so for this particular instance, you would take a more democratic or left-leaning approach to addressing inflation?
Well, absolutely. I consider the basis of my economic priorities about small businesses, about bringing manufacturing back to the United States and creating pathways for worker ownership and employee ownership in all businesses to be broadly a more left-leaning approach. And on economics, I would consider myself more left-leaning.
Okay, let's move on. The pandemic has caused major disruptions in America's labor force, with millions of Americans quitting their jobs. Vermont has about 26,000 open jobs, but we don't have enough young workers to fill them. What are the first steps towards addressing the workforce challenges in Vermont and around the country? Liam Madden, I'd like to start with you.
That's a beautiful question. So our workforce challenges are intimately related to our housing challenges, because as I work in a small business, I've run my own small business, I know that it's very difficult to find workers. It has been, especially in the building trades, for much of the last 2 years. And part of that is because people coming to this area can't find a place to live. So investments in housing doesn't just mean give outs to the real estate developers. It also means investing in water and sewer, investing in different transportation infrastructure to be able to accommodate closer, more centrally located to downtown areas types of housing models. So I think that's where the federal government has the biggest role to play. But of course, there's vocational training, including that into education systems, education models, and understanding that housing as a whole is something that we can address only in the short term by regulating Airbnbs and big investment banks that
I'm going to cut you off right there, but because I do want to ask you. Now, Liam Madden, you've said that you think migrant farm workers that have lived in Vermont for less than 5 years should be deported. Given the labor shortages facing Vermont's dairy farmers, why should we deport people that are keeping our dairy farms running? And what, if any, federal immigration reform would you propose to those workers to remain here and live in our state legally?
So I want people to know that I am the son of an immigrant and I am the grandson of 4 immigrants. So I understand that in a time when there are labor shortages in Vermont, it's important to recognize that legal immigrants, no one works harder than immigrants in this country, and that they are an essential part to keeping us a diverse, healthy, strong country and economy. But we need laws, and you need to acknowledge that if you come here illegally, you're likely to get deported. That just makes sense. Now, in that same breath, we need to make it easier for people to legally come here and work, especially for key industries.
I'm going to give you 15 seconds. What would you do, if anything, to let the workers that live here now remain here and to continue to work and live?
So if you've lived here for over 5 years, I think you're rooted in this community enough where you shouldn't just be deported and uprooted in your life, but you should have to absolutely go to the back of the line of citizenship and to engage in more community service and engage in more stringent regulations about staying employed, staying out of crime.
That's 15 seconds.
Sure.
Becca, Senator Balint, I want you to respond to this notion of farm workers and immigrants should only be here, only allowed to stay here for 5 years. And if they haven't been here for 5 years, they get deported.
So I just want to be clear. Our agricultural economy, not just here in Vermont, but nationwide, is dependent on migrant and immigrant labor. That is the reality. We have got to find a path to citizenship for these folks. It is, I think it's disingenuous to say that folks should go to the back of the line when we have such an incredible backlog for folks seeking legal immigration. And this is something that Congress has failed to do for many, many cycles now. And I think we need to really think out, when I talk to workforce, when I talk to companies here in Vermont, organizations here in Vermont, they all say part of the solution to our workforce crisis here in Vermont is about changes in immigration law at the federal level. That has to be part of the solution. And I think that farm workers here in Vermont are essentially allowing us to have a dairy industry here in Vermont. I want to support them in any way I can.
And I would like to get your takes on what you think the first steps towards addressing the workforce challenges in Vermont in our country should be.
So I have served on the Economic Development and Housing Committee for 8 years in the Vermont State Senate, and workforce development was one of the main reasons that I ran for office initially to represent Windham County. We saw locally that we were going to have a severe crisis in terms of workforce locally. So we have invested at the state level in training programs, investing in the Vermont State Colleges, in the Vermont Technical Schools. We have a high graduation rate here in Vermont, but we don't actually have a high rate of graduates who go on to do any additional training, and we need to focus our attention there.
Senator Balint, you've described yourself as a progressive candidate on issues ranging from how you would tackle climate change to addressing systemic racism and inequality. If elected to Congress, how would you find common ground with more centrist Democrats and Republicans?
So I am somebody who represents Windham County, and we tend to be more left-leaning in Windham County. And I am a progressive Democrat. I am a Democrat. I've always run as a Democrat, and I will look for partners wherever I can. That's what I've done in the Vermont State Senate. And I just want to remind folks that I was the first woman ever to be elected President Pro Tem of the Senate, and was able to get elected because I had the support of Republicans, Democrats, and progressives. And in terms of the people supporting my campaign, I have Republicans, Democrats, progressives, and independents who have endorsed my campaign. I am somebody who has a track record of working to build broad coalitions on a whole host of issues, including housing and workforce and minimum wage increases. And so you can't get work done working in isolation. You can't do that in the Vermont State Senate. You can't do that in Congress. And I have some great role models. Bernie Sanders and Peter Welch have both been able to find ways to work with their colleagues even when they were in the minority, and I will do the same thing.
Madden, you have said America's two-party political system needs to be overhauled and maybe even destroyed. If voters elect you to the House this November, you'd be a Republican essentially by name only. Like the Vermont GOP, House Republican leadership would likely reject you in their membership, and Democrats would likely be wary of a new Republican to the House. How exactly would you achieve anything to help Vermonters?
Well, being an independent is actually a position of incredible leverage because both sides don't just automatically count you as a given vote, dogmatically following the party leadership and the party agenda. So I think it's important to recognize I don't think any freshman congressperson goes there and really gets their wish list accomplished. But if they're willing to make relationships, be open-minded and collaborative, you can get a lot done. So I think you get things done by accentuating the fact that as an independent, you can be an emissary to both sides, and you can help to find common grounds and be a kind of a trustworthy voice who is willing to call both sides out on their hypocrisy when it's there, and to defend them when the accusations against them are baseless.
Now, I think your discontent with our political system is understandable, but we've seen many candidates in Vermont say they're running to overhaul a broken system, and voters may be pessimistic of someone making such promises once again. What makes you any different?
So I don't have any illusions that there's something special about Madden being so charismatic or such a good bridge builder. I think it's the actual tools that I am proposing that are indisputably new to the political discourse. So things like liquid democracy or qualified democracy, things like federal ballot initiatives are not part of either party's agenda. So I think that it is folly to just try and put a new face in over and over, but if you actually adjust the tools themselves, which I'm suggesting we do, then you can gain more ground.
Senator Balint, I'd like you to respond to that and maybe also answer how you're going to get things done with such a polarized House and such a polarized climate.
What I would want Vermonters to understand is that one person is not going to be able to overhaul a system. You have to be able to work within the system to make meaningful change for Vermonters, which is what I have done year after year. People have asked me, why run for Congress? It's the same reason why I was a public school teacher. It's the same reason why I have served in the Senate. It's to alleviate suffering. And to do that, you have to be willing to work in partnership with people to actually pass legislation. And that takes compromise and pragmatism. And I have a track record of doing that.
Let's move on. The Supreme Court has agreed to hear a case next term that would dramatically change how federal elections are conducted. The case is Moore versus Harper. The issue is a legal theory that would give state legislatures unrestrained authority to set the rules for federal elections, free of supervision by state courts and state constitutions, according to NPR. As our nation struggles with a threat on our democracy with false claims of voter fraud, if this is overturned, how do we preserve the integrity of the court and our democracy at the same time? Liam Madden, we'll start with you.
Wow, that's a deep question. So I think voting itself is the only check and balance that the citizenry has against the government. And it's every 2 to 4 years, and it's often for the choice of lesser of two evils. So we need more than just voting. We need a renaissance of citizen engagement and civic engagement. And that's really the only way that we can have a healthy democracy worthy of the 21st century, where we know that autocratic governments are going to innovate and use the best technologies to be better autocrats. But if the democracies, the free and open societies of the world, aren't willing to upgrade how they're playing the game of democracy, then we're doomed. The future will not belong to the people of this planet. So I think we need to understand that voting rights are essential, but so is expanding the tool set. Abraham Lincoln said, if I had 8 hours to take down a tree, I'd spend 6 hours sharpening my axe, meaning our effort isn't the only thing that matters. It also matters what tools we use, and we need to think about innovating them, because the Constitution was built when the information traveled at the speed of horseback, and it travels at the speed of light today.
I'm going to give you 30 seconds to elaborate on this analogy that you use when it came to sharpening your tools and what tools you think the United States needs to have a better democracy.
So we need to be able to, thank you for this question, bypass gridlock and politicians who aren't listening, and bypass corruption. And right now it's only voting every 2 to 4 years, so we need ways for citizens to bypass that through federal ballot initiatives and referenda, but just because people have more power doesn't mean that they will actually necessarily make better decisions. So you need to simultaneously have a suite of technologies that helps people come together and make better decisions. Right now that technology is social media, but it's being used in the opposite direction to drive echo chambers and polarization. You point that technology in the opposite direction, and you generate cohesion and shared values.
Senator Balint, I want to ask you, given the role that the court has played, especially with big decisions like the overturning of Roe versus Wade and possibly this overturning of Moore versus Harper, how do we preserve the integrity of our court while also preserving our democracy?
Connor, I'm really glad that you asked this, because I hear from Vermonters over and over again. I've been really crisscrossing the state for nearly 11 months now, talking to Vermonters about what they're concerned about, and the court comes up time and time again. If, in fact, this case overturns norms, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about overturning norms for free and fair elections. It brings us one step closer to authoritarianism. I have been very strong in my positions on how we address the dangerous precedents of the court. And as an openly gay woman, I'm very concerned about what Justice Thomas has laid out as sort of the next line of fire against taking away, human rights here in Vermont and across the country. We need to look at court reform. Absolutely, we have to look at term limits for federal justices, both on the court and on the federal branch of judges. We have to look at restraining the number of cases that are used through the shadow docket or the emergency docket. And this is very serious. This is not something that we can take lightly, and we need to pass H.R. 1, which is essentially another Voting Rights Act.
The proposed Moore versus Harper case could affect national elections. For example, state legislatures could set new election rules taking power away from voters when picking electors for electoral college. One possible solution here would be by eliminating the electoral college for presidential elections. Is that something you'd support? Why or why not?
Yes, I would. If you look at what has happened on the court right now, we have a majority of members of the court who have been appointed by presidents who did not win the popular vote. So absolutely, I would support ending the Electoral College. I think it is not representative of the will of the people anymore, and that is deeply disturbing.
Now let's turn to an international subject, the war in Ukraine. Since Russia invaded in February, UN human rights monitors estimate some 5,800 people have been killed. Hundreds of thousands of refugees have fled, and the global energy crisis has affected everything from energy prices to the cost of food. How do you think the U.S. and NATO allies should proceed? Continue funding Ukraine or push for peace? What are your thoughts? Senator Balint, we'll start with you.
So as we've watched what's happened in Ukraine in the last few weeks, especially, it's very alarming. We have, on the one hand, you've got Ukraine making gains in the east and the south. You have, certainly the most recent bombing of the bridge to Crimea has escalated the conflict. And you've got Putin saber-rattling now, talking about using tactical nuclear weapons. This has brought this crisis to a different level of concern, not just for folks at the federal level, but folks here in Vermont. I get asked about this all the time. We should be doing everything that we can at this point to avert nuclear war. And that means multilateral engagement with Ukraine, with our allies. We can also rely on President Xi in China, who has some leverage with Putin to really ratchet down the saber-rattling around nuclear arms. It's very concerning.
Do you have concerns that the war in Ukraine and Russia's allusions to using nuclear weapons could break out into a larger conflict? And how fearful would you be, or are you, and when it comes to World War III?
We should all be concerned about the kind of rhetoric coming out of the Kremlin in the last few weeks. We should all be concerned about this. And yes, I hear from Vermonters that they are deeply concerned that this kind of escalation is going to lead towards a nuclear standoff with Russia. And we can take a page from what happened with Cuba under President Kennedy, and really looking at how do we make sure that there are talks going on behind the scenes, that we are continuing to support Ukraine while also having a full court press on diplomacy.
Madden, when it comes to what's happening in Ukraine, how do you think the U.S. and NATO allies should proceed?
So we need to be extremely aware that there are two very likely courses of action with continuing to support Ukraine militarily. One is that there's a long protracted war, which is, in my opinion, the stated goal, or at least unstated goal, of the U.S. national security state to bleed dry Russia, a rival. Or on the other hand, there's the avenue of a escalation that could lead towards nuclear war. And both of those likely outcomes of continuing to support the war should be avoided. And the only way to avoid it is to put all of our diplomatic and economic and soft power leverage on creating a negotiated solution, which was what I was for from the outset. And as people know, I am the former leader of the nation's largest anti-war organization of Iraq veterans. So I am not against war in all cases. I believe that there are things worth fighting for. But I am the person at this debate who, from the beginning, had the judgment to say, those are the two likely courses of action, and the United States military and foreign policy apparatus needs to change course.
Now, you just mentioned that you're a Marine Corps veteran, and you organized a national anti-war movement with veterans at their core. What lessons from your time in Iraq would you point to as instructive in this war in Ukraine?
That the U.S. foreign policy establishment is who gets to control the public narrative in the media. And there's less than 3% of all op-eds in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Wall Street Journal on the mainstream news outlets are anti-war voices. And that's because our media complex is owned by the military-industrial complex. So I take the lesson that you need to be extremely skeptical of the marriage of those two society-wide influences.
This concludes the first segment of our debate. When we come back, the candidates will have an opportunity to ask each other questions. I'm Cyrus, and this is the debate with the candidates for Vermont's only seat in the U.S. House, live on Vermont Public.
Frederick Douglass was born into slavery.
I was a graduate from this peculiar institution, with my diploma written on my back.
How did he escape
Douglass, through and through, was a revolutionary.
and fight for change?
He commands your attention.
Don't miss his courageous journey.
If there is no struggle, there is no progress.
Becoming Frederick Douglass.
Tonight at 10 on Vermont Public.
Hi, I'm Cyrus.
And I'm Michaela Lafrac. We're moderating the Vermont Public debates this month, and we want to know what's on your mind.
If you have a question that you want to submit for the candidates, send an email or voice memo to vote@vermontpublic.org.
Watch the debates right here on TV at 7 o'clock.
Or stream them live at noon at vermontpublic.org. This is the Vermont Public Debate with the candidates for the U.S. House. I'm Cyrus. With us today are Republican and self-described independent Liam Madden of Bellows Falls and the Democratic candidate and State Senator Becca Balint of Brattleboro. The candidates will now have an opportunity to ask each other questions. We'll give you 30 seconds for your questions, and then you'll have 60 seconds to respond. And a reminder, a brief follow-up is allowed. Liam Madden, we're going to start with you.
Great. So, Becca, you've had several months to prepare for this one because you've heard me say it at almost all of our co-appearances. The economy and energy use are completely linked. And if we were to grow our economy at 3% a year, which is what every politician and economist says is the normal to be sought after target, then we would use the same amount of energy in the next 3 decades as we have in the last 10,000 years. And at that rate, we would deplete all of our fossil fuel reserves, and we would have, within 10 years, every single square inch of American land being used as wind power, if we were to use wind power, or 10% of American land to be used by solar panels.
Liam Madden, can we get to your question?
Sure. So how do you, you're a fan of the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal doesn't mention how we deal with this never-ending growth in the economy that requires more energy than we have land or resources for, and the solar energy doesn't provide power at night. So what is your approach to those problems of never-ending growth and energy resources?
So I think what's important for Vermonters to understand is I'm somebody that has taken climate change seriously here in Vermont, and it was one of the first folks in the Senate to be able to pass significant climate change legislation, the Global Warming Solutions Act. And so I think what is confusing about your question, Liam, is that we have to move towards an economy that is not dependent on fossil fuels. We know this because if we don't pull back, we know that we're going to continue to see the kind of climate catastrophe that I'm already seeing in my part of the state in Windham County. And so for me, it's not a choice of whether we can do that or not. We have to do it. We have to invest more in solar. We have to invest more in the grid. We have to make sure that Vermonters have the money in their pockets to be able to transition. And so it is, it's critically important to Vermonters that we do this.
So you didn't mention either never-ending growth or the fact that solar energy can't provide all of our needs unless we use an obscene amount of land, and that it can't provide that power at night.
Well, what I know is that this crisis is going to require all kinds of solutions, from wind to solar to reduction of use to weatherization of our homes. And that's something that we've done here in Vermont, is really trying to attack it on all fronts. And that's what we need to do at the federal level as well.
Fair enough.
Senator Balint, question for Liam Madden.
Liam, I have spent my entire time in the Senate protecting reproductive rights. and I helped to shepherd a state law through that would codify Roe. I also worked really hard to make sure that we would have this constitutional amendment on the ballot come November. And you've said that you believe that state governments should decide whether a person should have an abortion or not. Multiple states now are banning abortion in all instances. And do you still believe that states should have the right to tell somebody what they should do with their bodies?
I think you're wildly misrepresenting what I say. I believe that Ruth Bader Ginsburg is right saying that we should protect access to abortion because it's central to a woman's dignity, and that is better decided by legislation than by courts, and that the grounds for protecting abortion is better rooted in the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution and not the Roe versus Wade privacy rights argument. I agree with you that 99% or more of abortions, the ones that happen before a fetus can live outside of the womb independently, should be protected federally no matter what state someone lives in, as well as where there is the health of the mother or the fetus being inviolable with life. So well over 99% of abortions, I would agree with you that the states have no right to actually adjudicate that. However, where you and I differ is that I believe that after a fetus can live independently out of the womb, that very rare instance of elective late-term abortion, that those children have rights. And 86% of Americans agree that if you can live outside the womb, you should have legal rights.
Follow up, please.
The question is, don't you agree that the people making the decisions about those very difficult cases should be an individual Vermonter in conjunction with their doctor, and not actually have it be left up to a government to decide what should happen?
If 99% of the cases are protected at the federal level,
but they're not currently.
Well, I think they should be. I would agree with you there. What I would say is that we need to acknowledge that a legal right is a legal right, even if it is a rare instance that it needs to be protected. So is matricide and patricide, the Menendez brothers who killed their parents. That's a rare thing, but we still hold them ethically accountable for those actions, and that's the way it should be for the rare instance of elective late-term abortion.
That's your time. Liam Madden, do you have another question for Senator Balint?
So would you vote for a resolution supporting the admission of NATO, Ukraine into NATO?
I would be very interested to hearing the case that is made. I know that you've got some Scandinavian countries right now that are also interested in joining NATO. And so at this point, I need to hear the best case scenario for that to happen. I don't think that either of us have had the intelligence briefings that we need to be able to make these decisions here in this debate. We need to go into Congress with and understanding that we have to do deep learning and understand the issue from many different perspectives. And so I'm certainly open to that, but I would need more hard intelligence to help me inform that decision.
I would agree with you on we both need to be open to doing deep learning on a number of things, but I don't need to do too much deep learning to know that allowing Ukraine to join NATO would trigger an immediate hostile war with Russia that could escalate to nuclear war. So that's kind of already given in public knowledge.
We're already in a situation where Russia has invaded a sovereign nation and is already saber-rattling with nuclear arms. And so in that way, we have to look at what are all the possibilities on the table that would help deter this from escalating. So I'm not going to rule it out.
Senator Balint,
Yeah.
a final question for Liam Madden.
Yes. I'm proud of the work that I've done here in Vermont to work on gun violence prevention. And I helped pass Vermont's first meaningful gun safety legislation in decades. And as a parent and as a former teacher, I know just how painful it is for Vermonters when we see news stories of kids being slaughtered in schools. And I'm curious why you don't support an assault weapons ban.
So we absolutely should be working to reduce gun violence. And what I hold as a value with my liberal friends is that we need to find ways that reduce that effect of how guns have been available for generations, and yet only in this last generation has it exploded into an epidemic of violence. So maybe there's something in our communities and our mental health infrastructure that are causing some of this problem. Where I disagree with my liberal friends is that I see value in the ability of the Second Amendment to allow for coordination of defense against the government itself should it become authoritarian, because I have been a Marine that has been used as an implement of foreign policy to violently coerce a civilian population. And I don't think that the people who sent me to that war are so morally upright that they would never put the American people under that kind of subjugation. People on the right, I think, underemphasize that the Second Amendment clearly says that the right to bear arms is connected to the responsibility to be part of something that is well regulated. So I think there's a middle ground that can be found.
That is your time. Senator Balint, do you have a follow-up?
Again, if you're going to root it in a well-regulated militia, why do you not support an assault weapons ban for individual people? That's what I'm trying to understand. And that's what I think Vermonters are trying to understand.
So if we're going to have the ability to coordinate defense against the government, right now, if it's a well-regulated militia, i.e. state National Guards, that's still under the chain of command of the federal government, so that defeats the purpose. So you would need something to be more local. And that would give me or fellow Marine or military veterans the ability to be in community, to understand that there's a link between rights and responsibilities, and the right to bear arms is linked to the responsibility to bear arms in community defense. And that people who have that kind of life experience can be with a Dylan Klebold or an Adam Lanza and provide some life mentorship to prevent that kind of tragedy from happening.
That is your time. This concludes the second segment of our program. When we come back, the candidates will answer questions submitted by Vermonters. I'm Connor Cyrus. This is the debate for the candidates for the U.S. House on Vermont Public.
On Masterpiece Mystery.
Who's finished it? Magpie Murders.
It's very Agatha Christie.
Atticus Pond, the world's greatest detective.
It's missing the last chapter. I'm going to go to Suffolk and look for the missing pages. Everyone he knew was in it. That's why the last chapter was taken, because it reveals the secret. The answer's in the book.
Magpie Murders, new series on Masterpiece Mystery.
Premieres Sunday at 9 on Vermont Public.
Hi, I'm Connor Cyrus.
And I'm Michaela Lafrac. We're moderating the Vermont Public debates this month, and we want to know what's on your mind.
If you have a question that you want to submit for the candidates, send an email or voice memo to vote@vermontpublic.org.
Watch the debates right here on TV at 7 o'clock.
Or stream them live at noon at vermontpublic.org. Welcome back to the Vermont Public Debates with the candidates for the U.S. House. I'm Connor Cyrus. Joining me live today in the Vermont Public Studio in downtown Winooski is Brattleboro Democrat and State Senator Becca Balint and Bellows Falls Republican nominee Liam Madden. It's now time for some questions submitted by Vermonters. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. And just a reminder, candidates, please limit your answers to 30 seconds or less. Our first question is about climate change from Donna in South Burlington.
What do you believe it will take the majority of Vermonters to support moving away from fossil fuels? What role does the federal and state government have in funding a changeover to high-efficiency electrification and other less harmful fuels?
Donna, thank you so much for that question. Senator Balint, let's start with you.
So I think the thing that I would want you to know, Donna, is when I talk to Vermonters, the vast majority of Vermonters want to do that. And for them, it's a financial concern that they're not able to do it on their income as it exists now. And so I'm looking to supporting a federal investment in solar and weatherization and getting folks trained to do weatherization on the ground here in Vermont. What I hear most from Vermonters is they want to do the right thing, but they either feel financially unable to do it or they feel paralyzed. And so we have to make it easier for them to make these changes personally.
Liam Madden, how do you respond to Donna's question?
Donna, the short answer is yes, investment in new energy technologies and infrastructure that helps us use less energy in the first place, things like clustered downtown housing and public transportation. Longer answer, I am a renewable energy professional. I co-won MIT Solve Award for business models addressing climate change. So I'm someone who's dedicated his life to protecting the beauty and the health and the vitality of this planet. And I think regenerative agriculture needs to be the backbone of how we approach climate change.
Our next question comes from Caledonia County.
This is Margaret. I live in Hardwick. What would you do to address the effect of the military-industrial complex on our economic priorities?
Thank you, Margaret, for that question. Liam Madden, we touched upon this a little bit, but let's dive into it again.
Okay, so Margaret, I think that I am the only candidate on this stage who has proposed reducing the military budget by 50% to provide the ability to invest in an economy centered on human well-being and sustainability. And I would add to that that strength as a country does not come from just our military. It comes from our productive capacity, it comes from the education of our citizens and our ability to have social cohesion and mobilize around certain issues. So that is what I will invest in, that kind of American strength.
Thank you for that. Senator Balint, how do you respond to Margaret?
I really appreciate the question, Margaret. I know it's been a source of frustration for both Senator Sanders and soon-to-be Senator Welch. Congressman Welch has said repeatedly, why are we continuing to support budgets, military budgets, above and beyond what the Pentagon has even asked for? And so although I agree with Liam Madden that we have to reduce the military spending, I think we have to be serious that if right now Congress is passing budgets that are far and above what the military has even asked for, a nice starting point would be to really look at what is needed and only funding that.
Our next audience question is about misinformation.
Hi, my name is Lawrence Smith. I'm a retiree living in Brookfield. I have concerns about where our nation is headed. My question is this: will Americans continue to believe elections are rigged if their side loses, or will trusted methods emerge to block false narratives? If so, what would that look like?
Lawrence, thank you for that question. Senator Balint, let's go to you.
Lawrence, I'm very concerned about this as well. It is clear to me, even being out and around Vermont on this campaign, there are times when I have had to engage with Vermonters about misinformation and disinformation. I think one thing that Congress needs to get serious about is really regulating big social media. I think that that is the root of a lot of the misinformation and disinformation that has spread so quickly, and we need not to be afraid to regulate that. It's a powerful tool, and it's not working for good right now.
Liam, how do you respond to Lawrence's question when it comes to misinformation?
Lawrence, this is a serious problem, and the way social media has affected our society, I think, is profound, and we need to understand that it can be, as Senator Balint said, a tool for good or a tool for harm. What I am interested in making sure that as we address and regulate social media, that we do not destroy free speech, because we know that that has been the flip side of dealing with the disinformation problem. The way I would deal with it is a renaissance in critical thinking skills, because it doesn't matter if there's a lot of disinformation if we have a population that is capable of navigating that information environment wisely.
Thank you for that. The next question, have you ever had to admit you were wrong? Our next question asks just that.
Never.
My name is Xander from Heinsberg, and I would like to know whether over the course of your political career you have changed your position on any significant political issues, and if so, which ones or one, and what changed your mind?
Thank you for that, Xander. Liam Madden, let's start with you.
No, I've never had to do it, Xander, sorry. My political career is actually very, very short, but yes, I have come around from being incredibly fearful about climate change to allowing myself to view it as a challenge, a absolute, certainly a risk that we need to contend with, but not one that I am allowing fear to completely dominate my heart and mind with. So I have kind of stepped into a little bit more uncertainty around the facts to try to say what is the best path forward, even if I don't know exactly every piece of climate science out there.
Senator Balint, when it comes to Xander's question about changing your mind, how do you respond?
I really appreciate the question. As a parent, I can tell you I have to admit all the time when I've been wrong about something. One thing that I know my feeling has evolved over the course of the 8 years that I've been in the state Senate is my view on the opioid crisis and really embracing the idea of harm reduction, that we should be doing everything that we can at the local, the state, and the federal level to keep people alive, to get them into treatment, to make sure we understand that people relapse multiple times, and that's part of the process of getting healthy.
Our final audience question comes from CJ in Cornwall, who says they just turned 65 and are struggling to transition from Vermont Medicaid to Medicare. That transition led to losing a primary care provider and struggle to find a new doctor. CJ asks, Medicare premiums are taking a large percentage of my income while I'm losing access to medical and dental care. How can Medicare be reformed on a national level? Leah Madden, we're going to start with you.
So every European country seems to manage national socialized health care, and it doesn't bankrupt them. So that seems to be the only argument against it, is that it will bankrupt it and it will cause less care. But although we have had an epidemic increase in every chronic disease in the United States, from autism and autoimmunity and diabetes across the board, but we pay more. So I do not see how it is that every European nation can have socialized medicine to get people like you out of that problem, CJ, and the United States, the richest country in the history of the planet, can't manage that. So I am for socialized medicine, and I think we need pathways towards that.
Senator Balint.
Well, I think this is a great thing to see that Leah Madden and I agree that we have to move towards Medicare for all. And we are both children of immigrants. I think we have a view of the world in which we look and see other countries have been able to figure this out and take care of all of their citizenry. And I agree that it can't just be about purely physical health when it comes to Medicare for all. We need mental health care for all. We need dental. We need, eye care, and we should be doing better.
It's now time for our lightning round before the end of this debate. Please keep your answers as short as possible, which really means 10 seconds or less. So the first question, will you vote yes or no on Article 22, sometimes called Prop 5, the Reproductive Liberty Amendment that will be on the ballot this November? Senator Balint, let's start with you.
Yes, absolutely.
Leah Madden.
The wording is too vague for me. I think reproductive autonomy can apply to...
Is that a yes or no?
No, I will not be voting for it.
What technology do you think is the most critical for the United States to lead in this coming decade? Leah Madden, let's start with you.
Energy technology.
Energy technology.
Okay. On October 1st, Vermont became the 15th state to allow legal retail cannabis sales. Would you support legalizing cannabis nationwide? Leah Madden, let's start with you on this one.
I need to confer with Vermont growers. If it harms the Vermont growing industry, then probably not. But I don't want to see anybody in jail for marijuana.
Senator Balint.
Yes.
Do you support term limits for members of Congress? If so, how many terms, how many years should they serve? Senator Balint, let's start with you.
Yes, I do. I do believe in term limits. I think it's healthier for a democracy. Have to think, hard about what that could be. 3 or 4 terms in the Senate.
That's
perhaps.
time. Leah Madden.
3 or 4 terms in the Senate or the Congress?
I'll give you 10 seconds to respond to that.
I'm talking about in the Senate and in the House, perhaps 5 terms.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes, I support term limits. I'm willing to impose them on myself, and I think somewhere around 3 to 5 terms for a congressperson is appropriate.
Women in Iran have ripped off their hijabs and headscarves as part of a massive protest against the country's religious leaders. What, if anything, should the U.S. do to support these protesters? This is a big question, so I'm going to give you guys 20 seconds to respond. 30 seconds to respond.
We should always be investing in UN programs that support women globally. I think that's really important. It's critical work that the UN has worked on for a long time. I think we also, again, I go back to my issue about immigration reform here. We should be really looking carefully about how do we make our country welcoming to people around the globe who want to contribute to the American economy and the American way of life.
Leah Madden.
I think that was beautifully put, Becca. Yes, absolutely. Especially for people who are in autocratic countries and need political asylum. I think immigration reform is important. I don't really know how you can address the people in Iran's problems other than continuing to put economic and diplomatic leverage on the nation of Iran. And I think that means we need to be actually willing to negotiate with them and have less of a belligerent stance towards them.
Do you support a universal basic income, a proposed strategy to alleviate poverty by regularly sending every citizen a set amount of money? Leah Madden.
I have 10 seconds to answer. No, I think it would just cost too much, but I'm open to learning if that's not the case, but it seems like it costs too much.
Senator Balint.
I think it's a really intriguing idea, and it will save money for us in the long term. The small-scale projects that have been done on this have shown promise, and so I am intrigued by the possibility.
Would you support ranked choice voting in all state and federal elections in Vermont? Senator Balint.
I do support ranked choice voting. I've learned in the last few weeks that there are many different ways to go about it, and so my only caveat is I know that Vermonters disagree on what good ranked choice voting looks like.
Amen.
Ranked choice voting is a good innovation, is insufficient to the scale of our challenges to create a healthier democracy, but it is part of an innovation set that could help.
What role does faith or lack thereof play in your policymaking? Leah Madden.
Life is sacred to me. This planet is sacred to me. Communities that are healthy and vibrant are sacred to me, and I am here to be a servant to those things.
Senator Balint.
My view is always about alleviating suffering. That is my goal, and I have a very strong spiritual practice.
And an appropriate question to end this lightning round on, do you drive an electric car? Why or why not? Senator Balint.
My family does own one electric car, and we also own a small Honda Fit that we are looking to change for an electric truck, but I've been on the waiting list for a very long time.
Leah Madden.
I have a 2007 Toyota hybrid Camry.
Well, thank you guys so much for that. I know that was tough, and we did give you guys an extra time on that one to answer that really tough question. So now it's time for 1-minute closing statements from each of the candidates. The order was determined randomly before the show. Leah Madden, you're up first.
Fellow Vermonters, our political system is deeply dysfunctional, and it won't be fixed by one side or the other winning a supermajority and saving the day, or just asking them to be civil with each other. And to think that that is what will make it work is to think that trying the same thing over and over is going to yield new results, and that is how we should define insanity. What we need are innovations to the technology and the process of politics. And the only way that we can achieve that, I promise you, is through more and better forms of citizen engagement. The Constitution was designed to prevent the concentration of power through a system of checks and balances on the government, from within the government. But the only check and balance that the people have on the government itself is through voting every 2 to 4 years, often for the lesser of two evils. And that is not enough. Our history shows that is not enough to course correct a system this broken. A system that gives us a choice between Donald Trump and Joe Biden is a system that is failing to fulfill our potential. And I'm here to remind us that we are capable of a profoundly better way of doing politics. We're capable of so much more if we can be not afraid to be rooted in reality about the nature of our problems and to be visionary in how to navigate them. And that is what will help us do as Vermont's representative in Congress.
Senator Balint, your closing statements.
So first and foremost, what I want people to understand about me is I'm a longtime middle school teacher. And to be a teacher, you have to listen deeply, you have to build coalitions, you have to make sure that families coming into your school feel seen. And that is how I've done my work in the legislature. I am an experienced legislator who's worked on issues very important to Vermonters, from housing investments to climate change, reproductive rights, minimum wage increases, paid sick leave. I have done this because I care deeply about my community, and I have really worked hard to serve them. It's so important that the stakes right now are incredibly high. We need somebody in Congress who's going to be standing up for our human rights, who's going to be standing up for voting rights, and somebody who understands that if we fail, we will slide towards authoritarianism in this country. We see all the signs. I'm somebody who is clear-eyed about the challenges ahead of us, and I am honored to have served you as a state senator, and I hope I can earn your support for Congress.
Thank you so much for you two for those closing statements. This concludes the debate with the candidates for the U.S. House on Vermont Public. Thanks to the candidates who joined us today, Democratic candidate and Vermont Senate President Pro Tem Becca Balint, and Republican self-described independent Liam Madden. Join us for our next debate on Thursday, October 13th, where my co-host Michaela Lafrac will moderate a debate with the major party candidates for the U.S. Senate. That's Republican Gerald Malloy and Democrat Representative Peter Welch. The Vermont Public debates are produced by Matthew Smith, David Littlefield, Brian Stevenson, Kyle Ambusk, Mike Dunn, David Rice, Frank Allwine, Peter Angish, and Jen Jarecki. I'm Connor Cyrus. I appreciate you being here, and we'll talk again soon.